Welcome to Talking Buffalo, featuring conversations with guests from around the world of sports, media, pop culture, and all things Buffalo. With your host, Patrick Moran.
All right, what is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo Sports Talk and more. Today's episode is presented by Golf Dojo, your space, your time, your game. Bring your game to Golf Dojo, Western New York's best indoor golf experience. Visit mygolfdojo.com. Glad to be back. Quick note here. Yesterday, it's a little bit under the weather, so no show, but I feel great today, and I got a good one. In fact, I'm joined right now by my buddy, a recurring guest at this point, Go Long founder, Tyler Dunn, man. What is going on, dude? How you doing?
Patrick Moran. I'd much rather be, at HQ, pounding wings, pounding beers, talking ball. But, this will suffice. Like I told you, I have a couple kids going down for naps over my shoulder at some point. So a little different, but we'll get it done.
I was going to say, usually it's different when I meet somebody in person to do a show. But in the case with you here doing this via StreamYard is kind of weird. We've been to Imperial the last couple of times. You were here in my studio as well. So, so we're going to spend at least a nice chunk of today talking about your sit down. You recently had an hour sit down with Buffalo Bills general manager Brandon Beane. I'm sure there's a lot of Bills fans out there that were surprised to learn of this hour sit down. So we're going to dive into that in just a couple quick minutes here. Before that, though, I got to ask you a question. Now, I know you're from Western New York area, but you didn't grow up like in the city of Buffalo. Obviously, you're incredibly familiar with it. So overnight, Sunday into Monday morning, some terrible news, actually. The old Pink on Allen Street is no more. It caught fire overnight into the morning and is pretty much burned to the ground now at this point. We're taping this, by the way, Monday afternoon for a Tuesday drop. I'm sure, have you've heard about this? I know you're busy sometimes and you might not even know what's going on outside of your little bubble with the family and your work, but did you hear about that with the old Pig?
Yeah. You know what? I was at Starbucks. So in Orchard Park, they open at 4:30 now at the Five Corners on Southwestern. So I love getting in there 4:30, 5 a.m. and banging out a few hours of work here. That's the glorious period of time right then. But my wife texted me and told me I couldn't believe it. She, you know Gina. I mean, you've known Gina before I did, and she is all about the Buffalo food scene, downtown, suburbs, all over Western New York, and it's known as like a legendary dive. I've only been there a couple times myself, but it's a legendary dive bar, right? I mean, nationally acclaimed, I want to say.
Yeah, it is, and I got to admit something to you, man. I mean, obviously, everybody, if you're from the Buffalo area and you've been out anywhere, you know about the old Pink, but
it's sad.
I never went there much, man. I never went there much. I was more of first of all, I'm not really much of an Allentown type guy to begin with. Even when I was younger, I'm old now. Now I feel really out of place when I go to most of those places. But I would go to Brick Bar when I did. And I kind of, I'm regretful now because they were known for having like this legendary steak sandwich. And never got to have one. And that was kind of one of those places, and I'm sure maybe out where, you grew up, you had a spot like that. But like the old Pink was one of those places where you never really went there, but you ended up there. Like your night didn't revolve around the old Pink, but sure enough, at the end of the night, that's where like everybody would kind of end up.
That is how I ended up there. The one time, I said a couple times, I think it was just one time early on when I came back to Buffalo in 2015, 2016. And it was, one of those hazy visits, right? You might be a few IPAs in by that point, but your memories are always going to be fond. And it's sad. I mean, I don't really have many takes on the subject, Pat. It's just sad. When you see those images, it's like, damn, all the memories that were created there for the regulars that have been there and talked about it. An institution, no doubt.
As you get older and wherever it is, whatever town it is you grew up, kind of like the places that you grew up around that they all disappear for a variety of reasons. This was an unfortunate fire, of course, but sometimes businesses just close, they become other things. And it's kind of like the environment around you that you grew up around, that you're familiar with. As you get older, it really seems to change. Before we dive into Brandon Beane stuff here, real quick too, I don't know how much of a golf guy you are. I mentioned Golf Dojo. It's a sponsor of the show at the very beginning. Sunday, I should say, because people are hearing this on Tuesday. Rory McIntyre, just the last couple holes, he has a 2-shot lead with 5 holes left. He gets to 16 and he misses a 3-foot putt. 496 putts, 3 feet or less, coming into that putt for the whole year, not just his tournament. Didn't miss one. He misses that. And then on 18, he misses another putt that was like less than like maybe 4.5 feet. And he more or less loses the US Open. It would have been his first major since 2011. So like 13 years. Golf fan or not, that's hard to blow a tournament like that. The world is watching. The golf world is certainly watching you. And I don't know if you heard, but like, didn't handle it in the best way either. He kind of ducked out, didn't stick around to congratulate the winner, didn't talk to the press, was in his car like 10 minutes after finishing his round. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, Rory McIlroy, was he going through a divorce?
Yeah.
And then they got back together, and it's always difficult to connect dots. Is there something personal on the brain? I don't know. It's hard to get inside of somebody's head, but I mean, that's all mental. That's an epic choke job under pressure. I mean, that would be the equivalent of what, like, I guess if Jason Tatum, or pick your NBA player, Luka Doncic, in one of these playoff games missed 3 bunnies, right? 3 layups. And then, in the press, obviously you want to talk to people in their highest of highs, their lowest of lows, to just tell the full story of these sports moments we'll remember for the rest of our lives. But to not even shake the hand, I mean, that's worse, right? In golf, I'm not a golfer, but I've heard the etiquette is quite important to just storm off like that. And at the same time, I'm trying to put myself in that position. I'd be so pissed, right? Like, he's probably thinking, I got to remove myself from this situation before I take this golf club and go full Happy Gilmore on somebody's ass.
I mean, look,
so maybe do everybody a favor.
You've gotten to know a lot of football players, in your time covering football for a living. And it's just really hard to compare that to, or going back to the NBA, like you said. To me, it'd be like the equivalent of you're down 1 and you get fouled with 1 second left on the clock. Basically, you make 2 free throws, you win the game. Even if you just make one of those 2, you're going to OT. You're going to take your chances. You miss them both and you walk off the court a loser. But what I was going to ask is just, getting to know a lot of players like you have through the years, if you could kind of relate a little bit, or you would be able to relate to that moment. In hindsight, you and I could sit here 24, 48 hours later and say, when something like that happens, you should handle it differently. Maybe you should stick around. You should shake the hand. By the way, of an opponent that he does not like. It's pretty well known he does not like Bryce DeChambeau. Not speak to the press, which you are a leader of this sport. You are kind of like the face and the voice of this sport at this point, and to duck out on the surface, it seems like a really shitty thing to do. But like I said, you got to know some of these guys. Like, in the moment, you could kind of, I don't want to say you could relate to them to a certain extent, right? Where you don't want to talk, man. You want to get out of there. Most guys still talk, but I'm sure you can imagine how hard it would be in that moment after you know that you just blew something that you've worked so hard for.
Instantly go back to Quest Field, I think it was called at the time, the 2014 NFC Championship game. Mm-hmm. The Green Bay Packers against the Seattle Seahawks. I'm covering the Packers at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel at the time. And we're sitting in the press box, Pat. It's 19-7. I mean, it shouldn't have even been that close. The way Mike McCarthy was coaching that first half, with the field goals at the 1-yard line and the punts at midfield. Brutal. Absolutely brutal coaching. But they're still in position to win that game. As everybody knows, they blow it in spectacular fashion. And the key pivot point there, the tipping point, was Brandon Bostic straying from his responsibilities on the onside return. He's supposed to block for Jordy Nelson to recover the kick behind him. It would have been an easy recovery. Instead, instincts take over. It's understandable. He flies up into the air like he's on a trampoline. It bounces off his head. Seattle recovers. Seattle wins. Seattle goes to the Super Bowl. I'll never forget, though. I will never forget this till the day I die, Pat. Inside that locker room, Brandon Bostic sitting in his locker, going through his phone. I mean, in a trance. I mean, he's just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. Lord knows the vitriol that he was reading on that phone. And he, the media, we all kind of assemble around his locker, and it's, yeah, you're a hardcore reporter. I mean, as a human being, how can you not feel for this guy? I mean, you just know it. Everybody knew in that moment when it happened, this is what he's going to be known for the rest of his life. This moment right here. And he realized that as he's going through his phone, for sure, he stood there and answered every question, took 100% of the blame. He would have talked longer if, PR is kind of doing him a solid at that point, like cutting it off and like, okay, one more question. And guess what? The next day, locker room cleanup day, same thing. Stood there in his locker, answered everything, had to be cut off again by his own team. I mean, nobody will remember that, right? Unless you were there. But the class that Brandon Bostic showed in that moment, it was unbelievable. And it kind of harkens back to Scott Norwood after Wide Right? He's in the locker room talking for an hour. I mean, it's crazy. I can't imagine what goes through these competitors' heads when they know. I mean, they know more than anybody that what just happened on that field is what everybody's talking about, everybody's thinking about, and it's gonna be a scarlet letter on your chest for the rest of the time. But that would be the opposite of McElroy.
I don't know. I don't know how I'd be able to handle it too. Like I don't handle failure too well as it is, and just like in my little family eye, my little circle, when something goes wrong, about. I can't imagine when the world's watching, and it's a shame too, because again, he's one of the greatest golfers of this or any era, and he might never win a major again. I don't know if you come back from something like that, you have it in your hands. Which, by the way, again, I know you're not a golf guy, so we'll get off this subject, but Bryce DeChambeau to hit that bunker shot that he hit on 18. I mean, Rory choked, but this guy also hit a almost like once in a lifetime bunker shot to get up and down and win the tournament with all that pressure. Props to him. It just sucked to see that, and it was just not the best way to handle it. But anyway, let's get into why I got you on the show today, or at least one of the reasons. You score this big sit down interview for full hour with Brandon Beane. Let me start by asking you this: how did this come together? Because look, I'm sure there's certainly some fans out there, maybe some media, and to an extent myself. And I talk to you at least relatively regularly, and it's not always about sports. We talk about a lot of things, but I was a little bit surprised, man, that to learn that you got an not exclusive, but a sit down, a long form interview with Brandon, because there are still some Bills fans out there dating back to last year who probably think that in the eyes of the organization, Tyler Dunn is publicly, number one right now after, all the Sean McDermott stuff last year, which we've talked about. But, I'm sure there's still some fans out there that might feel that way. And it was certainly, at least among them anyway, kind of a surprise to learn about this. Like, how did this come together, the opportunity to be able to sit down with Brandon?
Right. As often is the case, Pep, perception doesn't meet reality when it comes, not just with Bills. I mean, any fan base, honestly, like we talked about a while back, going through this whole routine, covering the Packers at Bleacher Report with the Rodgers McCarthy story. There are a lot of similarities in just kind of judging fan reaction to a quote unquote explosive story. But I guess how it came to be, I'll keep private conversations private, but I'll say this. I sat down with Sean McDermott at the Combine in Indianapolis. He wanted to get together. I said, that is a fantastic idea. We got to know each other. We hardly even talked about the story, but it was a very, very productive conversation. Just getting to know each other as people. We haven't really had that opportunity. And from that point forward, I think the Bills, unlike other teams, I mean, you have to give the Bills plenty of credit to open the doors. I said to them at that point what I said years prior, where the goal for any journalist, anybody covering this game, is you want to talk to as many people as you possibly can to tell a story and to report on anything. So they get that. Sean McDermott gets it. Brandon Beane gets it. To kind of race ahead, I just asked Brandon through the Bills if he'd like to sit down and discuss his vision. This was the most consequential offseason for him as a GM since drafting Josh Allen. I should say, since diagnosing him as everything this team has been missing. I mean, he has been the electroshock that the Bills have needed for a generation, and you've got to give him so much credit for manipulating up the board to get him. But this such a big offseason. I really just wanted to sit down with Brandon and get into everything that I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, I get that on the outside, right? It's oh my gosh, Tyler Dunn at Go Long wrote this story about Sean McDermott. The Bills feel this certain way about it. He is exiled forever. Well, no, I mean, that's not the case. It's a good relationship, and obviously stand by every single word that I wrote in that series. There was never a contentious exchange with Sean, with Brandon at all on that front. It generally was a chance to get to know each other, and we did. And yeah, I wanted to sit down with the GM to learn a little bit more.
I would say this too, and you're 100% right. But this is one of those cases where perception just simply does not meet reality, and that can often be the case when it comes to sports journalism and people who cover the team or a sport for a living. I'll say this though, and maybe part of the surprise is last season in your Sean McDermott. Well, it's not just about Sean. There's a lot more than just Sean McDermott. But in your story,
right, like six players going to bat for Sean McDermott in the story too. Right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
People who read the stories, they understand the full context here.
Absolutely. I'll say this though, like last season, you said in the story that at that time anyway, you were not granted a credential by the Buffalo Bills at that time. So I think maybe that's kind of like why, to be able, because I know you've also you've been at, I believe, I can't remember one specifically, but I know you've covered a team. So it's like you've been at pressers recently with the Buffalo Bills, to my knowledge anyway, right? Out in Orchard Park.
Yeah, so I covered the draft all 3 days at One Bills Drive and minicamp. So I was out there at minicamp during the week chatting with players, a coach for stories that will roll out in the future. But yeah, I do want to stress, like, I think that it is excellent PR by the Bills to be willing to sit down and have a conversation and open that door. So give the Bills credit, Sean McDermott, Brandon Beane, for having a conversation that I'm sure a lot of fans did not think was ever possible.
That's where I'm kind of getting at right now.
And you know what, Pat, like the goal at Go Long, and we've talked about this, is I want to pull up the curtain. Like this game is full of a lot of good, a lot of bad, a lot of ugly, and the fans are the ones paying these obscene, paying an obscene amount of money for tickets, for beer, for parking, for everything. I mean, the fans are what make the NFL a multi-billion upon billion-dollar industry. So don't you think that the fans deserve truth? You know, you're putting all this money into the game. You're putting all your sanity into this game. And to me, that's kind of the compass. It's like, okay, let's sit down with players for these humanizing profiles, these deep dives, and also there will be bigger picture team stories. And at that point, they're, I believe, 6-6, and they lose to Philly in a fashion that's eerily similar to a lot of these losses that all seem to get nicknames. And it seemed like fans were in a place where they wanted to learn more. Let's just say that, right? Like what is going on with this team? This window of time with Josh Allen when you can win a Super Bowl. So working within the parameters that were set for me with this particular team. I mean, you don't need to be at press conferences every day, right, to tell a story, to write anything. I mean, phones exist, and I've covered the NFL since 2007. So players, coaches, scouts, you just reach out to everybody that you possibly can. And that's what I did. I mean, did the Isaiah McKenzie show for a couple of years. I've written Bills features Damar Hamlin, Deion Dawkins, Devin Singletary, Quentin Morris, Tywan Jones, a whole bunch of guys. So, I've covered the team as best as I possibly can, living here in Western New York, and with as much authenticity as I possibly can.
Sure.
Knowing that, platitudes and pandering is easy, not just here, but everywhere. I think anybody that's covering any team in the NFL, it's if that paycheck's going to be coming in every couple weeks and you're living comfortably. And, I think it's, there's an instinct to just kind of chug along and not rock, and not why rock the boat, right? Like why take a baseball bat to the hornet's nest that is Bills Mafia, or like I said, any fan base, and piss off everybody, even if it's truthful.
Yeah.
And I get it. I totally get that, but it's just not how I operate. I'm going to follow that compass of trying to bring readers and fans the real deal. So, yeah, that's how that came to be. We spent a whole podcast talking about that, though. So sorry to kind of detour that direction, Pat, but it all kind of plays into what you're getting to.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I also, I want to stress something, that the vast majority of Bills fans, just like the vast majority of 31 other fan bases, will take the work that you've put out with this team. And we're just going to stick to the Bills because that's pretty much what we're talking about here today, even though you're not a Buffalo Bills journalist, you're an NFL journalist. But the vast majority of Bills fans respect and appreciate the work that you put in, and they enjoy the read, whether it's good news, bad news. It could be a combination of both. Like you said, the good, the bad, the ugly. And I feel strongly that the vast majority of fans completely respect that. And then but there was that minority of fans out there that were just, you said, you're taking a baseball bat to the hornet's nest there. That is Bills Mafia and inside the organization. So kind of circling back to, from that perspective, why it would have been a little bit surprising for some of them to see that Tyler Dunn is the guy who sits down with Brandon Beane for a very long interview, which, by the way, on Go Long's over 6,700 words. I'm a nerd. I took your article, I cut and pasted, I put it on a Word document. I'm like, I got to know how many words this man put out. And it's over 6,700 words there on Go Long for people to be able to go read. So let me ask you this again, without too many specifics of getting together. Like, how quickly did this come together? Like, was this something that you were looking to do with Brandon for a while, or once, you kind of got in your mind that what you want to talk about with him if you get this opportunity? Like, how quickly did this actually come together with Brandon specifically?
I've always thought it was really impressive, just like from afar, how transparent Brandon Beane is as a general manager.
Mm-hmm.
Look, no general manager is just going to sit there and give you access to files on how they think about everything and why they do everything they do. But man, I've sat down with several GMs over the course of the years, and I'm thinking back to John Lynch a few years back, and he was very, very nice gentleman. He said a hell of a lot of nothing when we sat down. Yeah. And I think that's not to pick on John Lynch, but I think that's probably the norm, right? For GMs, it's paranoia kind of just dominates the profession, whether they're speaking publicly or privately, anything. You've got the secrets to all these nuclear codes. That's what pro football has become. And it just seems like Brandon Beane has never really operated that way. He's been, exceptionally open with other media members. And there's been a lot of writers who have done some great stuff. I know Matt Fairburn, my buddy here, he did like a scouting trip with Beane and Joe Shane, a while back. That was great. So kind of knew that going in, and early in the off season, I think early on you could kind of tell that the Buffalo Bills were undergoing this just total metamorphosis as a franchise around their quarterback. They were reinventing the roster around Josh Allen early, right? That was like a Black Thursday when all those guys were let go. Tre'Davious White, Jordan Poyer, Mitch Morse, and Nyheim Hines was thrown in there. Saran Neal. I want to say Gabe Davis not re-signed. Tyrell Dodson. And I think at that point it's when I started working on a 2-part series. I think it's called Smash the Window, if people want to check it out.
Yeah.
So it was early in the offseason, just trying to get a sense for how can the Buffalo Bills just obliterate that Super Bowl window that we're always talking about with Josh Allen. The 2006 Indianapolis Colts came to mind. That was another team with another really good quarterback, an all-time quarterback in Peyton Manning that couldn't get over their own Goliath, the New England Patriots with Tom Brady. There's so many similarities. So chatting with Bill Polian and Jim Sorgi, Dallas Clark, and those Colts, and then kind of bringing it, comparing it to these Buffalo Bills. Then I was just really fascinated by like the Bills situation. They're 41 million in the red after the new cap comes out. So really, Brandon Beane's thinking in the high 50s probably before that new cap number came out. So yeah, to answer your question, it was early in the offseason that I wanted to sit down with Brandon Beane to see what this moment in time is really like as a GM. So, they get through free agency, they get through the draft, they find their wide receiver and Keon Coleman by the way, they traded Stefon Diggs, kind of skip past that transaction. That was a biggie. And I like anything, you just reached out to the team. This is after I'd met with Sean McDermott at the combine and had a really good conversation and knew that the doors were open at One Bills Drive. So just put in a request for Brandon Beane and he was all about it. And actually I think we almost sat down a couple weeks earlier too. I was traveling around to the Dolphins, to the Jaguars and the Texans. So, I mean, it could have even been earlier than I guess people saw.
Sure. I'll tell you what, I want to take a real quick break, come back on the other side. I want to dive into a couple topics that are featured in your sit down at Go Long with Brandon Beane. So we'll be right back. All right, I am back here with Tyler Dunn, owner and founder of Go Long, who just recently had an extended sit down with Buffalo Bills general manager Brandon Beane. Lots of really, really interesting things about that. And I agree with you 100%. Brandon Beane is one of the more transparent GMs in football. Like, he gives you something, but he's still very careful on how he'll word things. For sure.
But he leaves some breadcrumbs, right? Like,
he does leave some breadcrumbs. Yes. One of them, which and I can tell from reading your article, you really wanted to pull out as much as you could with him, and that was with Stefon Diggs, because, that Black Thursday that you referred to earlier with Jordan Poyer and Mitch Morse and Trey White, it was Black Wednesday, actually. It wasn't Black Thursday. It was Black Wednesday. I remember it being a Wednesday. How about that? Anyway, really? That all happened. Yeah, that all happened in a matter. How I know that? Because I had to go to work at my job, and I was like, hold on, I might have to do an emerge pod because things happened one after the other. It was Mitch Morse, it was Trey White, and it was all Jordan Poyer, all within, like, say, a 90-minute window. But anyway, Stefon Diggs came later. I think that was April 3rd when they traded him. And there's a lot of people out there. And you said in your article, and I'm not going to give too much away. Well, obviously, we want people to read it, but that you heard that Stefon Diggs wanted out, and you asked Brandon Beane that, and he never said Stefon wants out, but he also really didn't deny it either. And he never has denied it. He will not say a negative word about Stefon, and he just kept saying timing. Like, timing was a very big word in your interview with Beane. Just talk about, like, the Stefon Diggs thing specifically, as much as, like I said, you can, without giving too many specifics away of the story here, and just how timing, when it comes to the trade with Stefon specifically, was just such a big part of everything.
I appreciate the marketing and the cliffhangersmanship out of your head. That's beautiful.
I'm not a rookie, bro.
That's beautiful. We need to set the hook with a banjo minnow. Remember those infomercials, the banjo minnow? You'd see constantly as a kid. And just put it in the water and hope people subscribe to Go Along. Yeah. But no, we got to give the people some information as well. That's why we're here. Yes, I mean, look, Stefon Diggs. You say the name, and people are going to have an unbelievably strong opinion on the man, for sure. And I'm blown away by the 180. I guess this would be the case with any star player, let alone a mercurial wide receiver like Stefon Diggs. But the 180 blows my mind here locally. It went from how dare the media even question his happiness in Buffalo to screw that guy. He's a diva. Get the hell out of here. Quite a turn, I must say, from folks. Understandable, right? That's the nature of any fan base. I get it. You're going to get behind the guys that are in house, but I feel like, man, the truth of it is somewhere in the middle. And I get the timing, and I get why Brandon Beane used that word multiple times, because in 2020, we all remember where we were when the trade went down, right? Maybe you couldn't fall asleep, and it came across social media in the middle of the night, and holy hell, the Buffalo Bills are acquiring the recipient of the Minneapolis Miracle. This is nuts. And then same way on the way out. But I think on the way in, he was needed at that time. You had a young quarterback entering his third year, good receivers, not necessarily great receivers. And this was a team ready to make its move with one of the brightest offensive coaches in the sport, in Brian Daboll. So, yeah, Stefon Diggs needed Josh Allen. Josh Allen needed Stefon Diggs. They both made each other better. There's a reason you drive around Western New York and see Allen Diggs signs everywhere. Like it's a political, yard sign. I get it. I mean, I don't think Brandon Beane is really filibustering when he says the timing was right then and he'd do it again, and the timing is right now. There are financials to it. But you're still eating 31 mil.
8 million more by getting rid of them now this year.
They want to take their medicine, get it off the books. And Brandon did say they could have divvied it up over multiple years. But so that is true. But when people read this and see Brandon Beane's comments in full, I think they'll be able to see there was more than just money to this. I mean, it's part of the transition. Like, there is value to Stefon Diggs not being in the locker room and new leaders kind of filling that vacuum. They want that. They're going younger. They drafted 10 players. They brought in some hungry vets on one-year deals who have been in the playoffs, had success in the Marquez Valdez-Scantling. And I think that's part of it. Culture. There's some culture stuff there. But he's careful with what he says, understandably so, because there was a lot of good to Stefon Diggs. He's complicated. I mean, this is somebody who just took the intensity level at one Bills drive from a 2 or a 3 to an 11. Like, it was different. He helped this team believe. He helped, that you need guys, you need alphas like that who are going to be vulgar, are going to be in your face, are going to be like, F that. Let's go. Now, he took it to an extreme. You heard from Isaiah McKenzie on our show, right, Pat? Like, he was his babysitter. He'd reel him in. He'd tell Steph to calm the hell down. That Jags game comes to mind that they lost down in Duval County when Diggs lost his mind. And there's Isaiah. So he did cross those lines. But with any talented player, especially talented receivers, you put up with it to a degree when they're really, really good. You just do. I mean, the Packers put up with Aaron Rodgers' nonsense forever because he was winning MVP awards. And then they're like, okay, now you're the Jets problem. Go to your events, whatever that event is, to skip minicamp. So I think, there wasn't really maybe there is a smoking gun we don't know about. Like, I'm open to all of that. Maybe he went rogue running his routes. I don't know. Who knows? There could be something else out there.
Sure.
With what we know, though, I feel like that's kind of you kind of got to get that with alpha wide receiver ones. You're going to get some baggage, and they won 4 division titles, so it was worth it. But from the Bills' point of view, the timing was right because they won some games without him being featured in the offense. They're going younger. And like you referenced, I was told he did not see eye to eye with Sean McDermott.
Yeah.
Okay. He wanted out of Buffalo early. Stefon Diggs said himself down in Houston, I was actually there for his press conference, like, he could see that this was moving toward a trade as the offense kind of went this new direction. And that's Stefon Diggs wanting out. So he wanted out. Now, like I said to Brandon, you could have just told him, too bad.
Yeah.
We signed you to a 4-year, $96 million contract just a couple of years ago, an extension. We believe in you. We love you. You're part of the solution. But I think it really is a little bit of everything. It's okay with Joe Brady and this offense. They can win without him. They saw it. Now, statistically, we can have that debate. Was the offense really that much better when they kind of went this new direction? I talked to Jeremy White about that on our pod. That's a whole other discussion. But yes, they won games. They moved the ball. They played a different way. And also, you're letting go of a lot of veterans. You're moving this new direction. And also, we do see the liking of tweets being critical of Josh Allen. This team's going to operate through Josh Allen. And also, Brandon Beane left a few breadcrumbs later in our conversation when I want to say 2 or 3 times he said your best players need to be at their best in the playoffs. That hasn't been Stefon Diggs. It
has not. It hasn't.
And so they've got to grade those games on a curb. That's what Bill Polian and those Colts did to finally break through. And I think that might have been like the final oomph that they needed to get to that place of trading him. Now, granted, the Houston Texans, as being said, like they came in with an offer like earlier. The Bills kind of sat on it, and they did a lot of thinking. They weighed out all these pros and cons. But I think that the playoff stuff definitely is a factor.
Do you get, and by the way, I'm so glad you said, and again, it's got a breadcrumb later in the article about the best players play good in the playoffs. To this day, I had you on a podcast, and this was 2 years ago. You came to Imperial Pizza. It was during the winter. And remember, that's when you were sick. You were fighting through like the trooper that you are. You were sick, and you came
bronchitis.
Yeah, yep. And honestly, and I've used this reference many, many times on the podcast since I had you on that day. And you talked about at the time, this was before last season. So last season didn't even happen yet. But you were talking about it's time for fans, the media, and the front office to kind of push the goalposts, move them back more now. These guys are playing really good in the regular season, and they're not showing up in the playoffs. Stefon Diggs was one of them. Ed Oliver was another one. Tremaine Edmonds, who's not with the Bills anymore, another one. These guys who were playing their best football in the regular season and not their best football in the playoffs, long story short. So I'm glad you mentioned that. And also, so you referenced the Isaiah McKenzie show, which you did for 2 years with him on Go Long when Isaiah was a Buffalo Bill. Look, Isaiah wasn't one of the best players on the team, but Isaiah was one of those guys who could kind of reel Stefon Diggs in a little bit. And Isaiah talked about it many times with you on that show. Do you think that maybe Isaiah being gone, and then, like I said, the other swoop of leadership, veterans, guys with voices that you're going to respect in the locker room, guys like Jordan Poyer and Trey White and Mitch Morse, he wasn't much of a vocal guy, but he was a leader that you respected in the locker room. Micah Hyde, who may or may not end up playing with the Buffalo Bills again. Well, I guess we'll wait and see. But all those guys gone. Do you feel like maybe Brandon Beane, do you get a sense after talking to him that maybe Beane might be a little bit worried about, listen, a lot of the guys who might be able to reel Stefon in at least a little bit, so many of them are gone that who the hell knows what's going to happen if, like, maybe the team gets off to a bad start or something, Stefan's not getting the ball enough. Like that lack of leadership, did you get a sense that those guys being gone may have played a role into saying, you know what, we should probably trade him now too? That timing thing.
Could be. Yeah, I think so. Chad Hall, I'm thinking back to the conversation I had with him in 2020. So it's that first year. But, I mean, he's like, you want him in your foxhole. He's your damn dog. Linebackers mentality. Like, that coach kind of got that player. And then you've got Isaiah McKenzie kind of reeling him in. It was a different dynamic. But I'll even take it a little bigger picture. I think you got to think about the psychology of the Buffalo Bills as a team, right? This is a half decade now. They've had a team that they think can win a Super Bowl, and these seasons have ended in just torturous fashion at times. I mean, 13 seconds, the beatdown in the snow to the Bengals. I mean, you get the playoff game you've always wanted in the elements, and you're embarrassed. You get the Chiefs in your house, and you lose on wide right, 44 yards, and a ton of other moments where, one play here, one play there, it's a different story. I think that Brandon Beane gets, and he said this in our conversation, like, you're not going out there with 53 players who have the same scars. By bringing in so many new faces, 38 new players on the 90-man roster right now. Now, granted, they're not all going to make the team, but they are clearly going out of their way to drive this franchise. It's a fresh direction. Now, they're not going to be replacing Sean McDermott anytime soon. Obviously, I get the argument that maybe they should. That maybe he is the reason these seasons fall short. But they're not going to do that. So by bringing in rookies, by bringing in, even vets like Curtis Samuel, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, they don't cost. I mean, Samuel did cost a pretty penny, I suppose, but just to freshen up the team. If you're gonna
Sure.
do that, because you want guys that are going to go out there in that moment and not have that dread of here we go again. It doesn't make sense to bring Stefon Diggs back, right? I mean, in many ways, he kind of represents a lot of these failures. And I'm not just talking about like the drop, but like, in that locker room, 13 seconds, I was told he's in there losing it. Like, again, here we go again. Every time, right? So, man, I we'll see. Like, we should listen back to this come next January. And if their receiving core is awful and a pop gun offense and Stefon Diggs is catching 100 balls for 1,300 yards with the Texans, it will all sound ridiculous. Like, you just keep your talented players because those talented players are going to get you to the Super Bowl. And I get that. But I also get what the Bills are doing here, and that it is important to like just try to reinvent this team at this point, because something ain't working. Something's not working in that moment, right? You don't want to completely tear down the whole operation, but you do have to take some pretty big swings here to set yourself up for a new phase and a newish window, I suppose, with the same quarterback.
Sure. Now there's lots of interesting topics throughout the sit down with Brandon for people to really kind of dive into. Like you had some good stuff talking about why Keon Coleman was the wide receiver pick, at the beginning of round 2 over several other potential candidates. Brandon Beane talks about that. He talks about Terrell Bernard last year, which I thought was really interesting. He was, you used that word at the beginning of the show here, perception, not meeting reality. The perception last year with Terrell Bernard is, you're kidding me? This is going to be potentially our starting middle linebacker. He could talk about how a lot of people would have said they would have been better off plucking a starting middle linebacker off the street because it would have been a player that people knew about. So anyways, some stuff about that, some pretty insightful stuff about 13 seconds, even a few years later, of course, plenty of Sean McDermott things. But the things that really stuck out to me the most with Brandon Beane in your conversation with him is the Josh Allen stuff. I wanted to read, I got one paragraph, kind of like a little small excerpt here that I want to read from the story that I really found interesting that you wrote. I want to ask you about. This is what you said. You said the Bills are armed with arguably the best player this side of Patrick Mahomes, yet all-time greats will also tell you that title chances did not last forever during the reigns of Michael Jordan or Tom Brady. These Bills are at risk of vanquishing in the same vortex. And you mentioned earlier, you're talking about the 2006 Indianapolis Colts and the all-world quarterback Peyton Manning. It kind of felt that way. They couldn't beat the Patriots. Ultimately, they get one. But that to me really stuck out the most. And just talking about letting Josh Allen be Josh Allen, to me, that was kind of like the highlight of this article.
To me too, Pat. I'm glad that you want to focus in on that, because I think it will be music to the ears of Bills fans that the GM, the individual with the juice in building this roster, and he does. And I think there's a lot of debate over who's really got the call right on draft day and free agent decisions, because Sean McDermott was here before Brandon Beane, right? I mean, long time ago, Doug Whaley and Jim Monis are working with Sean McDermott, and Brandon Beane comes in. So, and this isn't just coming from a conversation with Beane, people who have been through that building, they repeated to me, like, he's got the juice. He's the decision maker in that draft room. So I think that it's important to kind of note that he's the one who says he wants Josh Allen to be Josh Allen, right? Within reason. Yeah. And he does think that Allen has been able to find that balance of knowing when he does need to maybe slide, right? Yeah. If it's early in the game and there's no reason to gain an extra yard and a half, why do it? But man, he did say Josh Allen's got a linebacker's mentality. You do not want to strip him of that. That is what makes him special. He's got that Michael Jordan trait of, I want to take that last shot, even if I missed that last shot the last time. He sounded like somebody who wants Josh Allen to play free, which is the opposite of what we were hearing this time last year from McDermott as early as March in that NFL Network interview on wanting him to play with with caution. I'm paraphrasing on the direct quote in my head right now, but it was kind of like an edict from above to Josh Allen to play cautiously. And that's what you saw through September, October for stretches, right? Where he looked unsure at times. Do I run? Do I throw? Maybe I throw into the double coverage because I don't want to run. And I don't know. The comparison I love to use is just, I'm a fan of comedy, and I feel like comedians are going to piss people off. Dave Chappelle's going to piss some people off. Shane Gillis is going to piss some people off. And though you have to, if you're a comedian and you're terrified of offending somebody and you're tiptoeing around jokes. I mean, think about the Tom Brady roast. Like, you got to let these comedians go. Just let them do their thing.
I agree.
That's how you create art, right? Whatever that art is. So Josh Allen might run. He might get hit. Oh my God. Football, contact sport, heaven forbid. And he might get that's what happens in football. And you cannot.
He mentioned that he likes getting hit.
You can't
sometimes.
Compromise that. He did. He did.
He mentioned along with Cam Newton too in your article, in your interview. He said that sometimes Josh wants to take the hit. He kind of gets them in the flow of the game, the feel of the game.
Totally. And he easily could have taken that a direction of, and look where Cam Newton's career went, right? And look how those hits added up. And that's why we want Josh Allen to be, but he didn't. He gets it. Brandon Beane gets it when it comes to Josh Allen. Now, will the head coach get it? Will this new offense maximize all things Josh Allen? And maybe it's a product of growing up watching, Brett Favre as much as I did. But hey, there's going to be some boneheaded plays mixed in there. But you can't freak out over it. It's gonna happen. And I feel like the good is going to outweigh the bad, especially with this quarterback at this time. So, yeah, I think that's probably most encouraging out of anything Brandon Beane said is the one in charge, the one with the juice, the one who's making all these roster decisions at the end of the day. He wants the quarterback to be himself.
And do you get a sense that he really wasn't the first half of the year? You talked about having Jeremy on your show, and this, you guys spent a lot of time talking about the offense with Joe Brady. If statistically it was actually really better. I don't really know that it was, but what I do get a sense of is that when Ken Dorsey was the offensive coordinator, I think you saw a more conservative type of approach with Josh Allen. And I'm not saying that necessarily, again, statistically was even that much better with Brady, but in the back half of the year, I think you certainly saw what Brandon was talking about in your sit down, Josh being Josh, more like he was running the football in different situations more than maybe he was early in the season. And kind of leading into Sean McDermott before we get out of here too. How much do you think, or do you get a sense of that, Sean McDermott? Was it McDermott in your mind? Was it more Dorsey in your mind that kind of, you could tell it was pretty obvious early on in the season last year. They were trying to reel Josh Allen in a little bit, maybe not take those hits, slide, maybe not make that throw that might result in a bad play. To kind of feel like Sean was was spearheading that kind of, again, just reeling him back. I don't want to say, dumbing him down to that level, but just kind of trying to reeling him back a little bit.
Right. Because it's not like they're asking Josh Allen to go full Trent Edwards.
Exactly.
We're not going to that extreme. It's all relative. It's all relative, but I think you're onto something. I do think it did come from the head coach and wanting the quarterback to, settle. I mean, remember, it's a defensive head coach. That's the background there. And like any defensive head coach, they're going to want to kind of rely on their defense, and they know the value of turnovers. They know what one turnover, and it's true. Turnovers can completely change games. So I get all that. But how many quarterbacks can do what Josh Allen does? Really?
Right.
Who's his comparison in the history of the sport? I can't think of any. A Ben Roethlisberger with athleticism. So I think that, there was that. I think it was more so coming from the head coach to the coordinator. Ken Dorsey, let's not forget 2022. They had their growing pains as well, but that was an offense that took chances, that drove the ball down the field, probably too much. If anything, they kind of eliminated the slot receiver from the offense in the Cole Beasley sense, and it was go downtown, take your shots. And I think that almost kind of minimizes the impact of the shot play when you are taking that many shots. It's like if you're a boxer and you're throwing, haymakers all the time, you can't do that. So that was maybe his problem. I think that the head coach did want his quarterback to kind of steer a certain direction. But to Sean McDermott's credit, the last month and a half of the season, look, he looked like a coach that was open to his own evolution. You saw them going for it on 4th and short more. You saw Josh Allen running more. You saw him talk about belief, wanting his players to believe, right? You hear that with the best coach in the league. Their players genuinely believe, like in the moment, they can make that play with everything on the line. They're not thinking about here we go again. They're not thinking about 13 seconds. It's just natural to go win the game instead of not lose the game. And I feel like Sean, maybe with that Damar Hamlin fake punt, it's like you're trying to snap your fingers and change it right then. I didn't really have a problem with the decision, but you can't snap it into action. It's got to be year round. If he's really open to this new style of coaching and believing in your players, particularly your best player in Josh Allen, that's a good sign for the Bills, right? I feel like if that can become embedded in your whole operation, in your whole organization. That's why this time of year is important. You don't want guys on eggshells in May, June, July, like they have been in the past, frankly. But if the head coach's evolution mirrors that of the organization and everything that Brandon Beane did this offseason, which, oh, by the way, they're not afraid of the Chiefs. Trade with the Chiefs. Do what you want in the draft. That could be the equation that leads this team to a good place.
Brandon
or at least
Beane,
back to that playoff moment where they could win.
Yeah. He also used the word, he's used it throughout the offseason, and he used it in his sit down with you a lot. Transition. Like, this is transition, not rebuilding. And there's a big difference between saying rebuild and transition. You hear the word rebuild, that basically is saying, without saying, we ain't competing for a Super Bowl this year. Transition does not necessarily mean that. You get the sense that Brandon Beane still has very high expectations for the team this season.
I do. I think that he said at one point, you can't waste these opportunities, right? You only get so many of these opportunities, especially if you're going to green light Josh Allen the way they should green light his play style. Who knows, right? Who knows? I think Peyton Manning won Super Bowl ring. Brett Favre won Super Bowl ring. Dan Marino, no Super Bowl rings. Drew Brees won. Like, some of the very best ever have won one or none, especially if you're caught in the era of an all-time great. It's the NBA finals have been so terrible, Pat. I find myself YouTubing like 90s NBA. I spend your free time, right? Hey, Ella Sonny, no more Bluey.
Anyway, though, you would be doing that anyway.
True.
So.
That's true.
Yeah,
but I mean, I was like Hakeem Olajuwon in the Rockets, like they won 2 rings, and it's the year Michael Jordan was playing baseball, and the year he was coming back, and he wasn't up quite yet. Like Michael Jordan just absolutely evaporated all-time greats. Hakeem, Ewing, Barkley.
I was a Knicks fan during that era, so trust me, I know they couldn't get past the Chicago Bulls at all, except for when Michael didn't play. So I worry about that as a Bills fan, sure.
Which brings me back to what you asked. I mean, yeah, they want to win the Super Bowl this year. Yeah, that's the expectation. It should be, because who knows how many opportunities you're even going to have. All right, that's why I don't think it's a rebuild. I think it really is a genuine transition into. That's why they couldn't just tear the whole thing down, and they didn't want to go full New Orleans Saints and push money into the future and kill yourselves that direction. It is a genuine like middle ground here.
Your final as we wrap up here. All right, so I mean, it's not like this was your first interaction with Brandon Beane, the first time you've been around. I mean, I feel like you kind of known him a little bit before that, but like after sitting down with him and having this length of conversation with him, like, any perceptions that might have changed? Like, what was your takeaway on Brandon Beane, maybe even as a person, after doing this interview and spending some time talking with him?
Yeah, I mean, he's charismatic, kind, open-minded. Like we started this podcast with it. There are teams and coaches and general managers who easily could write off particular members of the media as never talking to that person. I think he gets it. I mean, he gets journalism. And like, we didn't talk about the past. We talked about the team now. He answered my questions. He answered them honestly with authenticity, more than you'll hear from just about every other general manager in the NFL. Sure. And we can absolutely like debate the substance of it. The Diggs stuff, man, I love having that debate because I can see both sides to that. I think Brandon Beane can too, right? Like, he gets it. But I think that the Bills fans are fortunate to have somebody running the show who's willing to talk about the team with such honesty. Look, Ted Thompson could be funny, and he had a dry sense of humor that was kind of underrated. I'll never forget at the combine one year, he's standing up there, and we all know he's not going to say anything at all. He never said anything. Like, paranoia. Like, what's more extreme than paranoia? Whatever that. Well, that was Ted Thompson running the Green Bay Packers. But he said one point, I could go full opposite George, and like George Costanza and Seinfeld, and just tell you everything, and you won't know what to believe. But I'm just going to stand up here and basically say nothing. And that's kind of how a lot of people in power in the NFL operate. That's the norm, not a Brandon Beane with the Bills, speaking as candidly as he is. So I'm looking forward to talking to him more, talking to Sean McDermott more, talking to players more. And I'll be in that building often this year. So really looking forward to it, Pat.
And I'll tell you too, and I think it'll be very interesting for a lot of Bills fans who, at least some of them, might be learning today that you have sat down with Sean McDermott and had a personal, private conversation. I think that's really interesting. And in terms of this article, look, man, I'm always been a fan of your work. That's no secret. And I would have read it regardless of who the GM was or what the topics were. But I'll say this: Brandon Beane, well, it was enlightening. As enlightening as a GM is going to get. Let's put it that way. I thought he was pretty transparent. He was pretty open. You said it. There are some really good breadcrumbs, at least, thrown out a lot through this article in regards to the 13 seconds and the Josh Allen, and especially when it comes to some of the Stefon Diggs stuff. So, people out there, if you haven't seen it already, make sure you go golongtd.com, one-on-one with Brandon Beane, Inside the Buffalo Bills, Master Plan, written by this guy right here, Tyler Dunn. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Ty Dunn. Always fun having you on, man. Feels a little bit weird seeing you on the video side like this on StreamYard. But it is, this is what we got to do sometimes when we got families and jobs and things like that, man. I appreciate you very much, dude.
Hey, thank you for having me, Pat. I always love talking, and next time we'll do it in the flesh, over wings, your place or Imperial. For now, our voices are just the lullaby to the kids over my shoulders. So unless they're listening closely, who knows? At 5 and 3, maybe they are.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for watching and for listening. I'll be back. Brand new show tomorrow. Talk to you then.